Oh, here we go. All right. So congratulations for making it to the final class of this JLI lesson, this JLI course, the values that shape Judaism's civil code. And I think JLI has, I want to say saved the best for last, but this one is a little more complex. There's a few more moving parts in it. So I think that makes it more interesting. And it uses a few different halachic references to make our point this evening, which is Judaism's take on the presumption of innocence. The presumption of innocence is the bedrock of our, one of the bedrocks. I should be careful what I say with people much more knowledgeable online, but I think it's one of the bedrocks, I imagine, of our civil society. And we're going to see what does Judaism have to say on the same topic. So we're going to begin today's class, though, with an exercise. It's in your book on page 166, but really the question is, do you consider that do you possess any conscious biases? Do you suppose that you possess unconscious biases? And do you consider certain biases positive? If yes, provide an example. So by raise of hands, do you possess any conscious biases? Raise your hand. I'm raising my hand. Right? Absolutely. Do you suppose that you possess any unconscious biases? Right? All the time. And do you consider the certain biases positive? Okay, that's a good question. Do you have any good biases?
Yes.
Yes? What would they be?
All people are good in the inside, somewhere deep down inside. There's something that they love. There's something that they care about.
So that's your biases. That's your positive bias towards others, that you believe that all people are positive. Is that, okay, very good. And that is definitely a positive bias that you could have towards other people. That basically allows you to perhaps overlook other things about them because you have a positive bias towards them. Very good. Yes, Moshe.
I can't agree with that, but I respect it. I have a positive bias when I am engaged in a transaction or a negotiation with a Jew. I respond more favorably, more lovingly, less hostily. And I'm not saying I'm a hostile person, of course, but I think that I try to find the good in it because he's my brother, my cousin, as opposed to, yeah.
Very good. I mean, I can understand what you're saying, that people who are of the same community as you, you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt faster than someone who's not in your community. And I think that's probably something that is people of all communities can relate to some degree or another. Doesn't
No,
always
I agree with him. I agree with him. And that's like, for me, where trust comes in. Just because I think everybody's a good person, some part of them is good. Right.
But if you have a bias, like Moshe was saying, that you trust people in your community, unfortunately, I can tell you that can very often come back to bite you big time. And it's very unfortunately, Moshe mentions the Jewish community, so I'll just go with that. That is, the Jewish community, very often people take advantage of that positive bias and people get ripped off and defrauded big time. Joe, that's not turned on. Let me turn it on for you. Yeah, 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, but very good. Now here we have another interesting word game. The word bias, what does it mean? And we have two opportunities, text 1A and 1B, to this from two different dictionaries. And interestingly, the Oxford and the dictionary and the Webster both have very different meanings of the same word. Text 1A. Let's see, Moshe, would you like to read for us text 1A? this is a prejudicial, how the Oxford Dictionary describes bias. Go ahead.
Prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair.
Right. And let's see 1B, Michael, 1B. This is from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the same word, bias. How do they do it?
An inclination to temperament or outlook, especially a personal and sometimes unreasoned judgment.
Okay, so we're going to see that these two words, that they actually have a very different meaning depending on how they're translated. So let's just go with a self-bias. What does that mean? So if we have a self-bias towards ourselves, this means that we are going to judge ourselves differently than we judge everybody else, right? Give you an example, exercise 6.2. You can just, if you like to look at this inside, but basically it asks you to describe how you respond to your own lateness versus how you respond to somebody else coming late, okay? Or how you respond to your own bad mood versus somebody else's bad mood, missed appointment or left a mess. And I'll ask you to choose various different descriptions. And I bet you, if you went through this exercise and you circled the ones that are the way you describe yourself and the way you describe others, very often you'll be biased towards yourself using more favorable language to describe what happened versus somebody else you describe perhaps less favorable. And the question is, why is this? Why is it that when you arrive late, you have a host of excuses on hand ready to excuse yourself, either to yourself or to another person, versus someone else who shows up late to an appointment, even if they're 2 minutes late, suddenly what a lazy person, what an unorganized person they are, etc., etc. And the answer for this is very simply that we have an inherent bias towards ourselves, a positive bias towards ourselves that allows us to overlook our own shortcomings. Why? Because we believe that we personally are inherently good. Problem is that we have a small problem called lateness, but that's not who we are. We are good people. Every once in a while, our lateness gets the better of us and we show up late. So therefore, we're able to judge ourselves favorably. When we're not judging someone with a favorable bias, then we look at their behavior as their whole sum, the totality of who they are. And they are irresponsible people because their entire person is irresponsible. Everything about them is irresponsible because of that one action they came late. We don't try to look at the reason perhaps why they were late, etc., etc. And this is just typically the way it is. It works also if we are self-critical, right? If we mess up, we're in the kitchen and we're trying to cook something, and we say, and it doesn't come out well, we say, oh, well, we're a bad cook. And we get on with our life. But if we serve a food and then someone says, this is terrible, who made this? They must be a terrible cook. Then suddenly those very same words are biting and difficult to accept because they don't come with the same self-bias that when we judge our own bad cooking, which means I'm actually a really good person. It's just in cooking, I'm not so good. But when it comes to someone else telling us we're a bad cook, it means we're really a bad in everything, including cooking. And so it's this positive self-bias that allows us to be self-critical without shutting ourselves down all the way, as opposed to when people give us that same comment, it shuts us down, right? No one likes to be. Why is it that we take criticism so personally? Because even if they're saying one thing critical, even if it's criticism about one small aspect about who we are, we take it about our totality of who we are in totality. Every part of us is included in that criticism. But ourselves, if we say, because we also have a self-bias. So this self-bias actually is not a good thing, right? Everyone agree with that? It's typically not a good thing. Although I would argue that in a way it is a good thing. But it's only a good thing if we extend that self-bias to everybody else. In other words, if we extend that same self-bias that we judge everybody as favorably as we judge ourselves, and it's a good thing to have. Personally, I think the reason why we have it is because it's like everything else that we have. It's part of our self, what's the word, ability to survival skill, right? If we weren't able to judge ourselves favorably, and every time and unfortunately we know some people who don't judge themselves favorably do, end up being in a very difficult emotional state. So it's actually, it's a healthy way. I think it's a healthy thing to have a positive self-bias because it helps us to overcome our deficiencies without going crazy. So we should keep positive self-bias. We don't want to get rid of that. What we want to make sure is we extend it to everybody else as well. And therefore, the more correct, the better definition for self-bias is text 1b, which is a personal, sometimes unreasoned judgment, but not based upon the individual person. It's unreasoned for everybody. We give everybody the same unreasoned judgment, ourselves and everybody else. Okay? This, by the way, is a very, very important lesson, and it's called giving someone the benefit of the doubt, right? A very, very important, character trait to have. Very often we don't give people the benefit of the doubt, and we jump to conclusions. And first of all, when we jump to a conclusion, most importantly, we could be wrong. And a lot of times we are wrong. And when we're wrong, and then we act upon those conclusions, we can actually get ourselves into trouble. So it's very important to try to always give the person the benefit of the doubt. And if you're wrong, it's not the end of the world. But if you're wrong by misjudging somebody for the negative, and they didn't do what you thought they did, and you acted upon that, or they acted upon your negative emotions towards them, that's where a lot of problems begin. So we have actually, this is something that we see is written in the Torah, in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15. Amber, read for us this extremely long text number 2a.
You shall judge your fellow with righteousness.
Okay, very good. Now, typically, this is talking about, this is talking about a judge who has two litigants in front of them. He has to make sure he judges with righteousness. He doesn't take a bribe. He judges them both equally. And JLI has very beautifully given us a joke about this, which I'm going to read for you. I don't like messing up jokes. I'm just going to read it for you. Okay, taking his seat in the chambers, Judge Davis faces the opposing lawyers. So he said, I have been presented by both of you with a bribe. Both lawyers squirmed uncomfortably. You, Attorney Smith, gave me $15,000, and you, Attorney Henderson, gave me $10,000. Judge Davis reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. He handed it to Smith. Now then, I'm returning $5,000, and we're going to decide this case solely on the merits. Okay, that was a joke. I thought it was a funny joke. Hope you enjoyed it. All right, but as I said earlier, in the verse 2a, the text is telling us that judges should just get back the $5,000 and keep it even, or of course not take bribes in the first place. And not even like, by the way, not even not to take bribes, or not even to acknowledge one person over the other, because that already can be seen by the other litigant as taking sides. Be very, very careful. I once had that happen to me, and the people who were with me, we were at a rabbi's house, and we were trying to litigate something in the communities when I lived back in New York. And the person that was our opponent, the rabbi, wasn't a proper court of law. He was just trying to act as a mediator. But when the person who we had called before this rabbi with our complaints came in, it happened to be the rabbi's next door neighbor. And the rabbi got up and said, probably he wasn't thinking, he was just his neighbor. He said, "Oh, welcome, Mr. So-and-so." And I remember one of my people in our group got really upset. That's not right. You should not have done that. It proves he has favoritism towards his neighbor, etc., etc. We were very upset about it. I don't think the rabbi was trying to be unfair. It was probably just he saw his neighbor. He greeted him like he greeted everybody else. But you see how careful he had to be. Even in such a situation, he should have not judged, not said anything. Just welcomed him in, just like he welcomed everybody else. Okay. But this teaches us also, of course, the people of how we have to judge people in our daily lives. And this brings us to text number 2b. We're going to go to, who read? Michael, did you read for us?
Yes, I did, or I can. What page?
2b, I'm keeping on your toes today. 169.
Included in this commandment is the instruction to each individual to judge their fellows favorably and to deliberately interpret their conduct and statements in a positive light. Through judging others favorably, we will foster peace and harmony among people as a result of eliminating mutual suspicion.
Okay, very good. And as I said earlier, this is a really important character trait to try to have. Always try to judge people favorably, and you can really avoid a lot of hassle. I'm sure there might be sometimes you're wrong and you may make a bad decision, but I think the more times you'll be right than wrong, and that will pay off handsome. Now, by the way, this doesn't mean you should walk around and just be, ignoring suspicious behavior or just ignore someone's unscrupulous past. No, you got to be careful. If you're dealing with somebody who's got a bad track record, open your eyes. Make sure that you're keeping, you have all your ducks in a row, and you're not missing anything. But very often, even when we don't have nothing on the other person, unfortunately, we tend to misjudge people, and especially in those cases, times we have to be extra careful to give the person the benefit of that if we have nothing to contrary to point us in a different direction. And it can really be save us so much hassle, so many wrong assumptions, so many fights begin because of people misjudging each other. Okay. So this is the idea of giving everybody, and we're going to get to the why. But first, before we get to the why we should judge people favorably, in addition to, of course, avoiding getting into fights as a result of not judging someone favorably, let's get to the human nature of people. Now, we know that humans, unlike animals, are not forced to behave in any certain way, right? Animals typically, if it's an aggressive animal, you can pretty much count on it being aggressive. If it's a nice, kind animal, you can pretty much count on it to be kind or unaggressive, should I say. But we know humans, we are all over the place. We can be aggressive, we can be kind, we can be happy, we can be sad. There's nothing, that's the difference between us and animals, right? We have moods, and the moods change, and our behavior changes, and we are much less, what's the word? We're much less predictable. The question is why, and what is at the heart of the human being? Well, so if we had to predict human behavior, what would it be? Would it be that human behavior is, at its basic instinct, kind and generous, but the learned behavior is mean and aggressive, or is it vice versa? Right? Have you heard of this discussion before? Don't know. Well, it's a big discussion. What is at the heart of the human being? Heart of the human nature? Are we aggressive and kindness is learned, or opposite? Are we inherently kind and are we learn very quickly when your older brother snatches away our toy when we're 1 year old that to be aggressive, right? It's a learned behavior. So actually, this is not something that we need to decide upon, because great minds have thought about this for millennium, and we're going to read from Freud. Freud, what does he say about this? Text number 3. Let's go back to Amber. Am I missing somebody? I think I'm missing. Oh, we have a few more people online here. Let's see. We have Howard. And Sheila's with us today. Hey, Sheila, how are you? Good to see you. All right. We're going to have you read soon. You're going to read the next. So be ready. Text number 4, Sheila, okay? Howard's going to read Freud. You're going to read Rogers. This is what does Freud say?
All right, here goes Freud. Men are not gentle creatures who want to be loved and who at the most can defend themselves if they are attacked. They are, on the contrary, creatures among whose instinctual endowments is to be reckoned a powerful share of aggressiveness. Homo homini lupus. Man is a wolf to man. Who in the face of all his experience of life and of history will have the courage to dispute this assertion?
Right? So here we have, sorry? Yeah. So this is Freud. Now, Freud basically says that we are born, and we have our inherent nature is aggressiveness, and he just looks back at nature, at history, and he says, look what humans are capable, look what human beings are capable of doing, and you can see that clearly the default nature of a human being is mean and aggressiveness, and if a human wants to change that, they got to learn to be kind. And most unfortunately, as Freud would probably say, many don't learn to be kind and act on their impulse and their negative behavior. Now, it's interesting that Freud wrote this in 1930, and this was before Hitler or Stalin or Mao. You can, right? Fast forward 100 years, almost 100 years, and I think Freud's statement is even, and fast forward the last 3 months, if you want to look what's going on in Russia, you can, it's very, I think it's Freud's statement is even more stronger and more valid. Humans are evil and mean-spirited people that hurt, inflict wounds and damage on others, right? So he makes a good point. Basically, that the premise we've gotten that is that humans, human beings are basically negative human, have a negative nature, and if they want to be kind, they have to learn. But we have, Freud was a psychoanalyst, but we have a therapist of psychotherapy. His name was Carl Rogers, and he says something different. Let's see what he says. He argued with Freud, and he says actually a very positive view on the human nature. So now we're going to go to Sheila, text number 4.
Okay. One of the most revolutionary concepts to grow out of our clinical experience is the growing recognition that the innermost core of man's nature, the deepest layers of his personality, the base of his animal nature is positive in nature, is basically socialized, forward-moving, rational, and realistic. Wow, that's different.
Very different, absolutely. Thank you for that, Sheila. It's absolutely very different, and it's a beautiful, and it's a much more refreshing way to think of each other, right? You think of each other, that our base instinct is kind and generous and patient and good. It's a much better way. It's a much more healthier way to see society, to see ourselves, by the way, not just anyone else, see ourselves, and to see others. You know, I run a summer day camp called Camp Kind. It's a day where kids volunteer. And this is a point that I continuously tell the kids. I said, we do volunteering every day at Camp Kind. I've made this point here on our JLI classes, but I tell the kids the reason why kindness, being kind feels so good is because we are inherently good people. And when we tap into that inherent goodness by acting out on being kind, it makes us feel good because we are true to who we are as human beings. Kind, generous people. Therefore, when I tell the kids, when they volunteer at a food pantry, animal shelter, and if they consider themselves being kind, it makes them feel really happy. We have a slogan in Camp Kind that says, being kind is awesome. Not just because of how it helps another person, but because it really makes us feel awesome. Okay. So, but this is definitely a very good way. And of course, much can be said about this point, and we can have a whole class just on the meaning of this. But we're going to take this into as with all these JLI classes, we're looking at the value that shapes Judaism, and we're going to see how that value. We're going to look at the Jewish values, and we're going to see how those values shape Jewish law. So this is, perhaps you can see where we're going with this, is we're seeing how Judaism looks at a person, at their inherent value, their inherent goodness, and how that inherent goodness will make a difference when we are judging them in a case of Jewish law. Okay, but before we get there, let's take a look. Okay. But let's get into the legal aspect of this. So we've finished with the ethical values. Ethical value is judging somebody favorably, right? Now we're going to see how that judging a person favorably makes a difference in Jewish law. But before we get to Jewish law, we want to take a look at secular law, right? So we're going to take a look at a reading in text number 5, which is a reading of the presumption of innocence. It's a model jury instruction. I guess if you were a judge, you would be reading from this text or saying something very close to this text before you dismiss the jury, or at the beginning of a case, I'm not certain, but sometime in between at a case, the jury would be hearing these words from the judge describing what their job as a jury is. So let's take a look. And by the way, I should mention, just because the presumption of innocence is based on the 5th and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, which says that no person may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. And that due process of law means that that the person is given the right, the presumption of innocence. Let's read this. It's an important text. Let's read this inside text number 5. Let's go to let's see, Moshe. It's appropriate for our in-house lawyer to read this text, I think.
The law presumes the defendant to be innocent of the charge, all the charges against him, her. This presumption of innocence is a rule of law that compels you to find the defendant not guilty unless and until the Commonwealth produces evidence from whatever source that proves the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden of proof never shifts. The defendant is not required to call any witnesses or produce any evidence, since he or she is presumed to be innocent. The presumption of innocence stays with the defendant unless and until the evidence convinces you unanimously as a jury the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It requires you to find the defendant not guilty unless his or her guilt has been proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
Thank you for that. I've never actually heard these words being said. And when I read it for the first time, I said, wow, it's a really powerful statement. It really does make it very absolutely crystal clear that the onus is on the state, the government, to prove a person's guilt. And the jury, judge, has to see the litigant, the defendant, as absolutely innocent until otherwise proven. Okay, very good. It's definitely a very benevolent way to have a society. We know many societies like Russia where you're guilty until proven innocent, right? Actually, no, it's the other way around. I think actually, now I remember, I was trying to think of this. Okay, but let's leave that out. It's a little play on those words, difference between Russia and America. But let's leave that alone for right now. But it definitely makes it more possible for a defendant to stand in a trial versus in other countries that the presumption is always that the person is guilty. Okay, let's move along. So what does Jewish law say? Does Jewish law have a similar set of a similar narrative that the person is presumed innocent until proven guilty? Well, so they have some. So let's go and examine this, and let's have a look. Now, this is where the JLI class gets a little interesting, because we're going to halacha doesn't just say, yes, this is how it is, but halacha uses a paradigm to make the case that a person is innocent until proven guilty, or a person has a level of innocence, a status of innocence. But it uses a paradigm in the laws of kosher. So we're going to examine the paradigm first, the laws of kosher. That is a law of kosher, which I'll explain in a moment. And that paradigm will help us understand the broader context, how it applies to in various different cases that we will introduce later in the class. So let's take a look at what the paradigm is. The paradigm is as follows, and we go on a little tangent here, so bear with me. The paradigm is, many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the laws of kosher. And of course, the primary law of kosher has to do with a kosher animal. A kosher animal means two things. First, the animal itself is kosher because it has two various signs, it has split hooves and chews the cud. Very good. First, but that means the animal is ready to be eaten under the supervision if it is slaughtered correctly. If it's not slaughtered correctly, it is not, even though the animal is kosher, but it's not kosher for consumption. Okay, so the way Jewish law sees this is as follows: that an animal, let's just go with a cow, right, is actually presumed to be not kosher until it is slaughtered, and then it's kosher once it's been ascertained that the slaughter is a kosher slaughter. So if you stun, for example, a kosher animal, or if you find a kosher animal dead in the street, you cannot eat it until you know for certain it was slaughtered by according to the kosher method. Of course, if it was stunned, even if it was slaughtered afterwards, it still is not kosher. Its method of death has to be through slaughter. Okay, but that's okay. That's a general statement. Let's apply this. But let's make the point we want to make in terms of the kosher our what we're trying to bring out with the analogy of a kosher animal. And that is as follows. So again, I think I just said that, but I'll repeat it. A animal is presumed to be not kosher. Now, what I mean by not kosher, in other words, even if it's a kosher animal, and only if it's a kosher animal can it even be considered worthy of eating at some point. But even a kosher animal is only considered to be kosher in regards to eating it when, sorry, let's start back up. An animal is presumed not to be kosher. When I say kosher, I mean it's not okay to eat. That's what kosher actually means. So an animal is considered not kosher all the time until you know for certain that it was slaughtered according to the kosher way. Okay? So the status of, if you come across a cow, and let's be very clear. If you, practically speaking, if you walk into a grocery store and you pick up a piece of beef, that beef is not kosher because you don't know if it was slaughtered according to the kosher way. When you know that the beef which the animal came from was slaughtered according to the kosher way, it switches to a kosher piece of beef, right? But if there's no way of knowing that it's a kosher piece of, if it was slaughtered according to the kosher method, that beef has a status of not kosher. Okay, it may have actually been slaughtered kosher according to the kosher method. But if you don't know that, and we don't know that, then the presumption is it is not kosher. Another example: you found, and there's a lot of the halacha goes into this in great detail. If you're walking in the street, you found meat on the floor. Is it kosher or not? The immediate presumption, the status is it is not kosher. That is how we immediately judge it. Until you can prove to me it is kosher. You understand? The natural status is that it's not kosher. Until you can prove that it is. And that's why in kosher meat, there's always going to be a symbol around the meat. It's going to be wrapped, double wrapped, with a marking on it, because until it's proven, it always has to be proven it's kosher. And if it loses that proof, for one, then it's not kosher, or if it doesn't have that proof to begin with. Okay, you understand? This is a very important, because this becomes the premise. A kosher animal, the meat of a cow, is not kosher until it's proven that it is kosher. Right? Because if you find an animal dead on the sidewalk, even if it's got a slit in its throat, which is how the kosher method is done, you still don't know if it was done by someone who's knows all the laws of kosher. However, now here comes the second thing. Once the animal is slaughtered according to the kosher method, it is presumed to be kosher until proven otherwise. In other words, there are certain things that could make the animal not kosher. For example, if a kosher slaughterer slaughters an animal and finds a defect in the kosher animal, that would allow the animal, that would make the animal not live out the year, right? When it has an illness, then the animal becomes treif. However, because we're not going to check the animal as, like it would go, in every aspect of the animal's body, major arteries and all, the entire animal. So we presume, unless we know otherwise, that the animal is kosher, just by the mere fact that it was slaughtered according to the kosher thing and it was healthy before, and we assume that it's always healthy, unless we know for certain it had a health issue, or we can see it has a health issue. If you open up the lungs, which by the way are the one area that we do check because it's more likely there that there is a problem, and we see the animal has a big illness, then it becomes not kosher. But if it has an illness somewhere where we'll never know, because we're not going to check, because it's something that's an area we're not bothering to check, because it's unusual that we would find something there, we assume, even if it has it, that it's kosher. But there's a difference in what I'm saying here, and that is as follows. Initially, the animal is always considered kosher, not kosher. The status is not kosher until proven kosher. Once it's slaughtered, it is always kosher, and it's always kosher because most of the time it's always kosher. So there's two aspects here. I'm complicating this a little for you, and therefore let's just stay with the first status. The first status is a kosher animal is considered not kosher until it's proven to be kosher. Proven means that you can tell, that it was slaughtered. You saw the animal was slaughtered by a rabbi. And he put his little ribbon around it, kosher. That's it. It's kosher. Until that point, I don't know. And it comes across my table, and no one knows who made it, who slaughtered it, it came from John the butcher or Moshe the butcher. I assume I don't know, and it's not kosher. Does that make sense? The natural status of a kosher animal is not kosher. Now it sounds oxymoron, but that's exactly what I'm saying. Because kosher to eat, it's not kosher to eat until I know for sure. Okay. We're going to say that this same natural status of an animal to be not kosher is the natural status of a person to be righteous. Right? I'll say it again. The natural status of an animal to be not kosher until proven otherwise is the exact same status that we apply to a human being to be righteous until proven otherwise. Should I repeat that? Oh, you got it. Got it? Okay. Let's read that inside. Text number 6. You'll get it when you read it inside. Let's have someone in the classroom to read. I'm sorry, I forgot your name again. Tracy, sorry. Tracy's going to read for us text number 6 in the classroom. I know you're not going to hear this on Zoom, so read inside text number 6.
The spirit established that we are all presumed to be righteous. Presumption regarding the kosher status of animals. As long as the animal is alive, it is forbidden for consumption. Remain in this state until we ascertain that it has been slaughtered properly. Once the animal has been slaughtered properly, it is then presumed to be kosher, unless it is clearly proven to be non-kosher due to a severe physical defect. Similarly, God created each of us upright and honest by nature. People retain this presumption of righteousness, unless it has been clearly proven that they have chosen to veer from the way of truth and righteousness and follow a deceitful and crooked path.
Thank you for that, Tracy. Okay, very good. So now, with this in mind, let's get to the 2 questions on page 174. A little bit of a tricky question. 174 in your student book. I'm going to read this out for you to examine or consider. With which of the 2 views regarding human nature, 2 views that we said earlier, that one, Freud versus Rogers, right? Freud that says we are inherently evil, bad, corrupt, and kindness is a learned experience. Or Rogers, who says kindness is a innate, instinctive behavior, and corruption, evil is a learned behavior. So which of these two views regarding human nature is a secular legal principle in text number 5, which is innocent until proven guilty, compatible? And then we go to the same question, but examined under the Jewish legal principle that we just gave in text number 6. With which of these two views regarding human nature, Freud versus Rogers, is a Jewish legal principle in text number 6, which is, we just gave that we are, I'll just try to use a few words. People retain the presumption of righteousness is clearly proven that they have chosen to veer away from the way of truth of righteousness. With which of these is text 6 compatible? So what do you think? Anybody? Let's see if you can figure this out. It's a little complicated, but let's see if you can figure it out. Anybody following along? And even if you maybe, I'm going to explain in a minute, but let's see if anybody can. Well, you have to tell me, so start with question number 1. So which of in text number 5, according, so if we're going to use Freud, right? No. 5 was the presumption of innocence according to the American legal system. So is that more in line with Rogers, Freud, or both? Okay, and text number 6? The secular law. Okay. Okay, let's go through this. So if you look on the board here, it says Freud. So if, according to this, let's go through this. You look on the board, okay? According to the presumption of innocence, does it make a difference? Does it make a difference to the presumption of a person's innocence if you view people as instinctive nature is to be aggressive, or if you're like Rogers and believe that the basic human nature is positive? Does it make a difference? You're the jury. Really? You're a juror. Could you, and the judge instructs you to give everybody, to judge a person the presumption of innocence. If you are a student of Freud, are you not going to be able to judge that case fairly? No, you're not. You are. Okay, so that's the point. That's where I'm going to tell you you're wrong. So that's the key difference over here. And that is when an American juror is given the instruction to judge someone innocently, it actually says that it doesn't matter how you view the human nature. You could view the human nature as inherently evil, or you can view it as inherently good. This person standing before you, I don't care how you see him, what his past was, he is innocent. End of story. He actually could have just been out of jail for committing the very same crime. Doesn't matter. You have to look at him right now as being innocent. And so Freud or Rogers makes a difference. You're going to have to look at that person as being an innocent person and judge the case purely on the merits of what's right before you. That's what's actually being said. Now, so Jewish law, just to be fair, when it comes to judging somebody, we know that there is a very high bar to cross when you have to convict someone, much, much higher. We don't, Jewish law doesn't allow just for one person to say circumstantial evidence to allow for conviction. There has to be 2 witnesses who saw the crime, and both have to actually have, especially when it comes to a capital case, have to have both seen the same thing. So when we've spoken about that in previous JLI courses. So there's a very high level for the proving a person's guilt when it comes to Jewish law. However, when it comes to judging a person, in a way, Jewish law is even has a makes an even greater statement, and that is that not only, and this is a key difference, and this is where Jewish law is more in tune with Carl Rogers, and that is that not only is a person considered innocent, but what is a person considered according to Jewish law? Somebody tell me. Righteous. Very good. I saw that being mouthed by Moshe and also by Dan in the classroom. Very good. And that's a much, much higher bar. When you look at somebody and when John says, not this person, not just standing before you is innocent, but is actually a righteous person, this is a whole different level of innocence. It's much greater than innocence. In other words, the natural default of a person, like the natural default of a kosher animal, or rather, just like a natural state of a kosher animal is proven to be not kosher until it's proven otherwise, the natural state of a human being is to be righteous. So yeah, it's a little bit. It's not really opposite. It's just so again. So this is so. Let me just give it to you using. So what the question in the classroom? What isn't that a little bit opposite? And so we are using opposite terminology, but we're saying the same thing. We're using the premise is the same thing, but the effect is different. So what is the premise? The premise here in Hebrew is called the word chazakah, which means the status, the proven status. This is how we see it. The proven status. It doesn't matter what else is happening around us. The status is righteous. That is the status. It's not based on majority or what happens in majority of the time. It's based on pure status. The status is, a chazaka is, the presumption is, it is not kosher. And that's in regards to an animal until it's proven otherwise. The same logic tells us that when we judge another person, the presumption always is non-kosher doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that's the status of that. Same thing over here. The presumption of a human being is they're righteous until we prove otherwise. We're just using the principle, applying it differently, but the principle stays the same. No, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's why we're not using it. It's not negative. It's not a negative thing. It's just to explain the status. We're using the principle to explain in the two different, and we're going to see how this principle actually matters when it comes to judging someone in a case, in a criminal case in Jewish law. That the presumption of their righteousness plays a major role. Correct. It's a presumption of the status. Like we have the presumption of the status of a cow to be not kosher until it's proven otherwise. The presumption of the status, very good, of a human being is to be righteous until proven otherwise. And we're going to see so where does this come from? Let's move along. Where does this idea come from? It's a nice idea. Why are we suggesting this? Are we just being very generous, or does it have some actual validity in Jewish thought? So in the classroom, Dan, read for us text number 7. So here's a key thing. And what we just said in text number 7 is that we say this in the morning prayers, that the soul that you breathed into me is pure. In other words, the core identity of a human being is godliness, is positive. And as a result, if that's the core, the transgression is something outside of me. The core is holiness, godliness. Then if I do something wrong, then that is outside of my core, who my real true identity is. And this indeed tells us in text number 8. Let's read it. Let's go back on. Let's give Joe. We're doing the classroom text. So if you're following on Zoom, on page 176, you're watching this on YouTube, look inside your book on page 176. Foolish spirits. Take it away, Joe, in the classroom, just from the Talmud. Very good. Which means that because our inherent core identity is good, then if it's good, how come I'm able to do something stupid? Because a spirit of foolishness overcame me and allowed me to do something against my core nature, my core identity. But at my very core is godliness, holiness, purity. And we know all too well how the spirit of foolishness in this world is immense, and unfortunately can overcome us. We can allow it to overcome us, and we can do all sorts of silly things. But remember, each and every time that is something outside of us. Our core identity is actually very, very holy. Okay. Now we're going to, so now we understand the way Jewish law sees a person, that they are inherently righteous. They have their core identity is godliness. Doing something. So now we can apply that to 3 different cases. This gets a little tricky here. So try to, I know, like I said, this class has been a little more of a, you have to kind of follow along. But now we're going to go back to that same concept of a kosher slaughterer. We're going to see how this applies in the case of a kosher slaughterer. So, most of you buy meat at a butcher, at a supermarket, right? You don't go to, you've never seen an animal being killed, because that's just not what you do today. Meat's already packaged, but an animal is killed by kosher standards using a knife. Okay, we don't stun the animal first, and then kill the animal, and then use a knife to release the blood, as it is done in most slaughterhouses. Rather, we use the knife as the primary method for slaughtering the animal. But this has to be done in a very gentle, sensitive way. We want to make sure the animal has the least amount of pain. And therefore, the slaughterer, in Hebrew they're known as a shochet, has to takes a knife and very, very gently, without pressing too much on the actual neck of the animal, slits the animal's throat. And the knife, in order to do this very gently, has to be extremely sharp, so that whilst minimum pressure is being applied, the job of cutting the 2 main arteries to the neck of the animal are severed. Okay, everyone's eating supper tonight? Good. All right. So it is really a pain. I mean, it is painless. As much as killing anything can be painless, this is a pretty pain-free experience for the animal. I wouldn't say painless. I would say it's as least painful as possible. It takes I've actually watched it being done, and it takes literally a second or 2. They're very, very fast, very quick. The knife is absolutely smooth. It's checked every time in between every slaughter. The knife is checked for any nicks, and a nick would make that process not so smooth. It could be a problem, and therefore it's done in the most humane way possible, which is why kosher meat is also humane as well as extra clean, because the blood is removed. That's another story. Okay, so now question is, who can do this? Can anybody go take that kitchen knife and sharpen it and go up to an animal and kill it? No, you got to be trained. It's a long process. Let's just leave text number 9 alone. We're going a little late on time here. But actually, let's read it. Let's go. Someone inside here. See, Amber, read for us text number 9.
A Jew who doesn't know the laws of shechitah, kosher slaughter, may not slaughter. Any meat slaughtered by such a person is forbidden for consumption. Even a person who knows the laws of kosher slaughter should not slaughter alone before practicing many times under the supervision of an expert scholar and achieving proficiency in the technique. Only a person who is well versed in the laws of shechitah and has practiced under expert supervision until achieving proficiency is considered a qualified expert.
Okay, very good. Okay, so it's a real quality. So it's interesting because kosher law actually means that a kosher slaughterer is someone that didn't just read a manual on how to slaughter or watch a few YouTube videos, right? No, they actually had to learn from someone who was qualified, extremely qualified. So, and this is called actually, it's someone that this tradition of how to make another person, how to slaughter, and how to make, and is given over from generation to generation, and it's something that remains mostly an oral tradition. In other words, as much as you can read it in the books, the actual expertise of how to do it is done by apprenticeship, by watching someone who has done this over and over again. Now, here's a question: what happens? Okay, if someone who comes into town and he says, "Guess what, guys? I learned how to slaughter I'm a shochet." I'm going to use that Hebrew word, shochet. So typically, the first thing they're going to do is they want to ascertain, okay, who did you study under? And perhaps if they have the ability to check that the person actually knows what they're doing. Let me see how can you actually do this? Maybe someone in the community knows the laws of shechita, of killing an animal and shechting it for kosher consumption. Let's see if this guy actually says who he is who he says he is. But what happens? That's what we would do under ideal circumstances, right? We'll check him out like any other job. If he's good, we'll hire him. If not, we're not going to hire him, and we won't eat that. We won't eat his meat either because it's unreliable. What happens if Sam comes to town and says, announces in shul, I am a shochet. I'm going to be shechting animals at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Anyone's available to come and get my meat. And before the rabbis had a chance to interview him, check him out, he's in there shechting 3 cows, does everything that he thinks it's supposed to do, cuts the animal up nicely, and before they have a chance to check out his credentials, he's left town. We have now kosher meat that's kosher because the man said he's a shochet standing in front of us, but we have no way to ascertain whether or not this man is who he says he is. Maybe he's a charlatan. Maybe he just likes killing animals. Maybe he thinks he's in training. He thinks it's whatever. We don't know. We haven't verified yet. We haven't seen his paper, his certificate. What is the law? Right? It's a good question if you think about it, right? Especially if he killed the last 3 cows in town. And that was the meat for Yom Tov. I'm serious. That was the meat for Yom Tov. You were relying for a wedding coming up. Okay, and it's the wedding guests are waiting for this meat to have a beautiful wedding, and he's gone out of town. What do we do? It's a real question, by the way. This is not just a make-up question. This happened. So what do we do? So let's read text number 10. Let's go back to the online over here. We have, I think Michael reads for us text number 10.
If a Jew came and slaughtered an animal and left before we were able to determine whether or not he was proficient practitioner, the meat may be consumed. The rationale for this law is that the majority of slaughter practitioners are experts.
So here we see, right? There are experts. So here we've introduced another concept, which is called the majority. Since the majority of slaughterers are experts, this man fits into the category of the majority, and therefore it's good enough for us, because the majority in Judaism, under the laws of kashrut, the majority is a status that we can rely on, despite being a minority that might be questionable. And this has many applications. So what we're saying right now is based on the halachic principle of majority. This man his meat should alone be kosher, because the majority of slaughterers are good people, right? If there was one job that you were going to fake, it probably wouldn't be a chauffeur. Maybe it would be a skydiver. No, just kidding. Instructor. No, that also not. Maybe it'd be something else. I don't know. But not a slaughter. That seems to be the case. Most of us, normal, upright people, not going to do it. So now this gets a little tricky. Question is, the rabbis want to know, and this becomes a question in halachic response. How are we able? Remember, I said that there was a status earlier that a piece of kosher meat is what? Before we can prove it, You find a piece of meat on the floor. What's the status? It's not until you prove it is. So how are we able, this is a question, right? If I was using my fingers, because that's how they do it in the yeshiva world. How are we able, I want to try to really get the question, the nitty-gritty question. How are we able to remove the status of non-kosher based on the leniency of the majority, of that he may fit into the majority? And therefore, it seems that we had this power of the meat being that has to be proven to be kosher before it can be consumed is lacking in this instance, and we're relying on a leniency here that should not be strong enough to take out of that principle that the meat is presumed to be not kosher until proven otherwise. That's the question, and so the Maimonides doesn't address it. Maimonides seems to be relying on one principle, but we're saying that principle doesn't seem to be strong enough to take us out of the major principle, which is that meat always has a status of non-kosher. So here we fall back on the original principle that we said earlier, which is that the majority of that the person is presumed to be innocent, a kosher person. And that is what we're saying in text number 11. This is from Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, who's a rabbi that lived not that long ago. You can see from actually he lived a long time ago, 1820 to 1892. But his legacy was began a family legacy of great rabbinics, of great rabbis that came many years after him, known as the Briskas. And he answers this question, and he answers it based on the principle that we said earlier, that status of a person is of righteousness. And therefore, in this particular case, we are going to say that this person, this slaughterer, even though he was unproven, we don't know his credentials, we have to say he was a righteous person, and we can't eat the meat. And it's strong enough to take the meat out of that status of not kosher and to be kosher, because the status of righteousness is extremely powerful. Let's read that in text number 11. And by the way, this is I know you're seeing this in kind of the abstract, but this is a real case that really could have happened, and it could still happen today. And the rabbis would say, 100%, go ahead, eat this meat. It's kosher, no problem. Give it to the greatest rabbi, it's kosher. And to say it's not kosher would be going against what the Torah tells us, if you wanted to be extra strict. No, it's kosher, 100%. Text number 11, let's see. Moshe, read text number 11 for us, please.
We consider every Jew as certainly righteous. We are certain they are particular about the laws of kosher shechita and wouldn't slaughter if they weren't a qualified expert. As a result, we don't say that since there exists a minority of non-experts who slaughter, the animal remains in its established non-kosher status. Among righteous Jews, there is not even a minority that would act improperly. The minority of unrighteous Jews isn't a factor worthy of consideration, because every Jew that has not been established as suspect must be considered as undoubtedly righteous. The presumption of righteousness is thus not just majority-based. We know that there is an unrighteous minority present in the world at large, but every individual Jew that we're evaluating must be considered as certainly righteous without reservation.
Very good.
Thank you.
So here we have that that principle really applies itself in a very powerful way. Again, it's not about the majority here, but it's about the individual person of being a good person, and that status that we said earlier, the status of a person being righteous has a stronger play, and therefore we consider the meat to be 100% kosher. When we're setting out to set standards and want to interview, then we're going to, well, in other words, this is an interesting distinction. So if that would be the case, and you say, okay, why bother checking out the person? If a slaughterer is presumed innocent or to be righteous, then every person who comes to town who says he's a slaughterer, just believe him 100%, and end of story. Why check his credentials? Why even make sure he can do the job properly? Follow the tradition. He said no. If in advance, in the setting of the policy of the community, then we have the luxury, and we should have the luxury to make sure, ascertain make sure that this man doesn't fit into the minority of being charlatans, people who say who they're a shofar without the qualifications, and we should check his qualifications. But that's if we're looking at the general policy coming with all sorts of people. We put them into the kind of the general category of people that may include those who are charlatans when it comes to knowing how, saying who they are when they're not. And therefore we have to check them out. But when it comes to looking at an individual person, who they are, we go on the presumption that they are righteous. And if it comes to a question about them, because we can't verify at that point, we give them the benefit of the doubt and we look at them as being righteous and accept their status as being a kosher slaughterer and are able to enjoy the meat. So we see here that this law, this value of judging a person, looking at a person as being righteous, is not just a nice pie in the sky value that Judaism says or claims to have, but doesn't apply. It actually applies it in real law and has a real effect on what type of meat I can eat. Even if, by the way, if I may be eating, think about this for a second, I may actually be eating non-kosher meat. Because what happens if the guy was a charlatan? He may have actually, there's no way of knowing, right? He left town. Maybe he's laughing at us. But the principle is strong enough to allow me to eat that meat anyway because of this principle. It's showing us that it's a real thing. It's not just, we're not just saying, oh, you know, sometimes we have values. Yeah, we all like to say we have high values. Every society likes to claim to have high values. But we're saying, no, these values actually are put to the test and allow a person to eat a piece of meat despite the questionable status it may have, because we assume that the person who slaughtered it was righteous. Some distraction there, I apologize. Okay. Now this next case, by the way, I love this next case because this next case actually happened. I'm going to give you an introduction here. Actually tomorrow night I may be visiting. I'm going to a meeting at the Westminster Police Department. They have like a community advisory board, and I go like, I suppose they meet like once a month. I try to go once a year. Interestingly, last year they invited me. It was like the first meeting after COVID. It was at the police department in down on 82nd Street. And the police chief, who is no longer the police chief now, he resigned. He told us of a story that had just happened in the previous week, and it was all over the news. The story was, I'll say it very quickly, which is exactly the story I'm about to read. The story is that there was a garage sale going on in Westminster, and the lady who had the garage sale saw her purse was missing. She looks outside, she sees a guy in a truck, goes over to the guy in the truck and sees a purse in the guy's truck and says that, and accosts him and says, "You have my purse." The man, who was of Hispanic background, denies or doesn't say much, but sees the lady acting somewhat aggressive to her, takes off in his truck. Meanwhile, she is in a little closer proximity to the truck than she should have been, and was knocked over by the van moving away, the truck moving away, and gets hurt. Not majorly, but gets hurt. The neighbors call police. They call the police, and the woman says, "I saw the man driving a truck. I saw the man with my purse in his truck. I went over to him, and I tried to say something. He drove away. He stole my purse." Okay, does it sound fishy yet? So what do you think Westminster Police? This is the police department, the head police chief telling us exactly what happened. Turns out, of course, a good story like this: a lady had her purse stolen at a garage sale. Makes the police department puts out a press release like they always do. 9 News, reporting live from Westminster. Truck man, Hispanic, these are his license plate is wanted by Westminster Police. And sure enough, a couple of days, this man sees himself on TV, his relatives, hires himself a lawyer, and calls up the police department. And the police department says he has to come in, arrest him, and put him in the slammer overnight. Meanwhile, guess who finds her purse?
Oh,
She calls up the police department. So I found my purse. And of course, they release the man. And they're very upset. And the police chief is really upset. He feels responsible. He was really emotional that he allowed his police department. This was right after George Floyd or some other, that perhaps they were they were biased against this woman's story, for this woman's story, based on the nationality of the truck driver, and they believed her a little too quickly. And as a result, they have egg all over their face. It was a big story. And he said to us, "What would you do? Did I do anything wrong?" And truthfully, had I given this class a week earlier, I would have known what to say, but I didn't. I had this wait a year, and I tried. I gave my. I don't know what I said. I don't remember what I said. I said something because I had to say something, but I didn't say what I would have said. But this is exactly the case we're dealing with in text number 12. So with that said, the introduction, let's read text number 12. Who's reading for us? So let's see, someone on Zoom. Amber. It was Sheila. You're back with us. Howard, you're going to read next. Sheila, read. Are you there, Sheila? No? Howard, you're next. Oh, Sheila's back. Sheila, text number 12. Okay, we can't hear you. You need to unmute.
Okay, how's this? Witnesses saw a person enter another house and leave with items concealed beneath his garments. The possessor of the items claims that he purchased them, while the owner of the house denies this. The law in this case is that the possessor is not believed. This principle only applies when the homeowner claims that the items in question were on loan and the possessor claims that they were purchased. But if the homeowner claims that the items were stolen, his accusation is rejected, for we do not presume a person to be a thief without proof.
See, had I known this case, I would have said, you made a massive mistake. Had you judged this case according to Jewish law, you would have said the man is 100% righteous and he would not have done this. And until you had, just because he acted suspiciously, as it was in the case, he didn't even act suspiciously, but even if he had acted suspiciously, he's righteous and he's not a thief. And don't put out a press release about him. You don't have enough information. Right. Now, they did interview the woman and they said that it seemed like she sold the same kind of purse, but that's not enough information. Just because he has a wallet and you have a wallet and your wallet's missing and you saw it in his truck doesn't mean he stole it. Now, to be fair, the Westminster Department didn't press charges against him. They just held him overnight, which is actually, so I'm not going to judge according to law. They may have been within their right to do exactly what they did, but had they been even more, had they taken what halacha says even more literally, not just presumption of innocence, but actually presumption of righteousness, then the man would not have, the story would not have even made the news. Because I'm sorry, this man has done nothing wrong. You have no proof. He's a righteous man. We know nothing. And maybe you were thinking he stole it because you have a prejudice against him, and not just. Right. And unfortunately, the prejudice was probably because he was Hispanic. I'm not saying for certain, but that could have been. So here we see again in Jewish law, even the person's acting suspicious doesn't allow us. Now, clearly, if there is more than that, more to it, we have, and we make an investigation or we have more information than just acting suspiciously, then the person leaves that presumption of righteousness and can be considered to be a theft. But we need information. That's why halakha always wants us to have witnesses to a crime, not just acting suspiciously. Because because of the high regard we offer every single person as being a righteous individual. And therefore, even their suspicious behavior, much less no suspicious behavior, is not good enough to consider someone a thief. But this is, I just found it interesting because I was learning this, and now I have this invitation tomorrow night. The story came back to me, and it's very unfortunate because this poor man sat in jail because the police department put out for his arrest. So even when he came in and may have tried to straighten things out through an interpreter, it wasn't good enough. They had to book him in. It was but had they seen him as Jewish law, maybe he would not have had to go through all this. He would have been, his word would have been considered stronger than what how they were able to give it. Okay. So the final case over here is an interesting one. So here we have. Here's again. It's all. Let's just go back again to what is the underlying principle. The underlying principle is that a person is considered to be righteous. In other words, that is when we say the Hebrew word is chazaka. And by the way, in the back of your book, there are the word chazaka, and on page 190, that you'll see there's a whole bunch of different chazakas that are used in halacha. Each one is, there's a status of different things. Pertains to different, are very apply across different sections of Jewish law. And they're very powerful, as we just saw, when it comes to applying Jewish law. So there's this presumption of a person's status, whether it's talking about meat, whether it's talking about all sorts of things, is a very strong status that allows us to dictate Jewish law in certain ways. We're seeing how it dictates in the case of suspicious behavior. Person's righteousness, the chazaka, the status, overrides the suspicious behavior. You saw it when it came to questionable meat. The status, the righteous status of a person overrides the suspect of a few unscrupulous slaughterers, and the meat is kosher. But what about someone who may even self-incriminate to a certain degree? Is that strong enough to take them out of their own status of righteousness? This is really a bit of a stretch, if you ask me, but it seems like it does. Let's take a look at this next case, final case on righteous in spite. So here we have a story. Let's take it. So there is a following. Here's a premise in halacha, which is an important one, and that is as follows: if you know someone's trying to buy something, right? You know that they have their eye on an item. It's on an auction, let's just say, and someone hears that you're looking to buy it, and they go ahead and that you made it very clear you want this item, and then you go ahead and undercut them and buy it. Take it out of them, take it from them. That's actually illegal according to Jewish law. Let's take a look at this in text number 13, preempting buyers. Let's see, who's reading for us next over here?
I believe you're wanting me to read, or
Yes,
Rabbi?
Thank you, Howard. Text number 13. This is a story from the Talmud.
Rabbi Gadol attempted to acquire a certain plot of land, but Rabbi Abba preempted him and purchased it. Rabbi Gadol complained about Rabbi Abba's actions to Rabbi Zira, who relayed the complaint to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka told him to wait until Rabbi Abba would visit him for the festival, at which point he would discuss the matter with him. When Rabbi Abba arrived, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka asked him, "What is the law in a case whereby a pauper moves to acquire an ownerless loaf of bread that he found, but someone else comes along and preempts him. Rabbi Abba replied, the one who took it away is referred to as wicked. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka pressed Rabbi Abba, if so, why did you act in this way? Rabbi Abba replied, I did not know that Rabbi Geidel was trying to acquire the land.
Here, this was a mistake, a case of mistake. He didn't know. He didn't try to buy this property in spite. But it was good enough for him to be summoned before the rabbi and say, "Hey, this is not okay, what you did." So, based on this principle that if you buy something while knowing that the other person is wanting to buy it, is illegal. There came before Rabbi Nissan of Grona the following case, which is that the person wanted to buy a piece of property, and he made an agent. He said, "You, Dan, you're my agent for that piece of land." Dan went to the auction and said, "You know, this is a good piece of land. I'll buy it for myself." Okay? You bought it for yourself. What is the law? Now you admit that you bought it for yourself. Have you acquired the piece of land or not? Let's take a look at this in text number 14. Let's see, Michael, text number 14.
A person appointed someone to serve as his agent to purchase a specific property. The agent purchased the property without specifying in the purchase agreement that he was doing so on behalf of the principal, and he now claims to have purchased it for himself in a personal capacity. The law is that we reject the agent's claim on the grounds that the Talmud labels such an action as deceitful conduct, and we operate under the assumption that the remnant of Israel will not commit an injustice.
Okay, so I'm going to make a confession here. This was a little bit of a riddle for me, and I ran over this a few times. I'm not sure I understand it correctly, so I'm going to say the way I think I understand this. The way I think I understand this, unfortunately, the JLI hasn't given me enough information to go by here. But the way I think I understand this, and you're welcome to, in the context of the way this is of the class, is that the law is that we reject the agent's claim. The agent's claim was that I bought it for myself. Now, even if he bought it for himself, that would have said that it's mine. He has a right to do it, but even so, he has a right to buy it for himself. It's still wicked. But the purchase is a purchase. If I purchase something, if you can make me an agent for you, but then I go ahead and purchase it for myself without considering you, and what I've purchased, this phone, is mine. Too bad on you. I may not be a good guy, but the purchase is a good purchase. Now I claim I purchased it for myself. But I claim this is accuracy. I'm claiming that I'm a wicked guy. Why? Because I bought it for myself, against what Torah is telling me to do, which is it's illegal. That's my claim. I'm saying I purchased it for myself, and you, Dan, don't get the phone that you wanted me to buy on your behalf because I actually purchased it for myself. That is the agent's claim. You're saying no. I am your messenger. The phone is mine. What we say over here, and again, it's a stretch, but what we're saying is, even now, under normal circumstances, a purchase is a purchase, right? Someone who owns, I did not mention that. But the law is a possession of the law, a possession. What's the possession is 100 thing of the law. What? Not possession, 9%. So now I have it. It should be mine. Even so, you claim that you said that that I'm your agent. But however, because we presume someone to be righteous, and therefore we say that what this man said, that he bought it for himself, he actually doesn't mean that. He actually wouldn't put himself into a status of being wicked. And therefore, his claim cannot be, and that's what we said. The law is that we reject the agent's claim. The agent is the person who made the purchase. And you, the principal, gets to keep the item. Because a person wouldn't put himself into a status of being a wicked person because they are inherently righteous. And you get the phone. Again, it's a stretch in a way, right? Technically, possession is, how does it go? 9/10 of the law, right? So if I have it, I bought it, it's not yours. But because in this case, there's a claimant who's saying, I'm the principal and he's my agent, and he acted, and I therefore, he's not believed, his words, I bought it for myself, are not believed because that would, so to speak, self-incriminate himself to being a wicked person, and a person's status of righteousness wouldn't allow him to do that. And if we almost overlook those words entirely and say the person, and we take the item away from him and we give it to the principal. It's a real, but again, what we're saying over here, I know it's a little bit of a mind bender, but again, what we're saying over here is that the Jewish value of a person's righteousness is a real deal. It's not just something that we just, a pie in the sky value, but it has a real application in Jewish thought. And what could be more invaluable than here? This person bought something for himself, but no, he loses it because doing that purchase would have put him under the status of a wicked person, and that's not within the line of how we view how a person is viewed in their status of righteousness. Okay, I think we're almost out of time over here, so I'm just going to go straight to the final point of the class, and that is that if you that the reality is that even so this concept of seeing people and under such favorable terms might seem far-fetched, might seem, a little more on the generous side that Judaism is offering. In reality is people really are very, very righteous. And in text number 15, I'll let you look at this inside, but basically there's an experiment where wallets were left all over the world, and most of the wallets were actually returned. And then they did a follow-up experiment where wallets with the money inside, and they had a name and address, which proved people were righteous. Then they did a follow-up experiment where they put more money in the wallets than what were in the first wallets, assuming that with more money, there would be less return, right? Because now it's harder for the person to return it with $100 versus 15. And what do you think they found? Exactly the opposite. The more money in the wallet, the higher the return rate of the wallets to the owner whose name was inside the wallet. It's not, but most of the time it is the case. And actually, interestingly, in a separate study, when they surveyed people what they thought would be the response, most people, conventional wisdom said, is that would be the opposite. More money, less return, less money, more return. But they were all surprised at the results that more money actually gave people, they incentivized people to actually return the wallet to the owner. And you see this in figure 6.1. What does this tell you? This tells you something really, really important about human nature. And that is human beings inherently are good, kind, generous, and trustworthy. And as a result, they do the right thing. They return the lost wallet. And if we know that about other people, then we can definitely extend that favorable view to them, and not just to the people in business, but friends, family, and not just ourselves, of course, but as many people as possible. And doing so will make us happier, and those people we interact with happier as well. Anyway, this concludes the sixth and final lesson of Beyond Right. I do hope you have enjoyed it. I've enjoyed teaching this to you. Thank you. And we look forward to you joining us again for similar classes. We do take a break of classes until the fall. JLI has a series of 3 classes, 3 courses set up for us for the fall, winter, and spring of next year. Obviously, information will be forthcoming closer to the first class in end of October, November time. Of course, we'll have programs for you in between, and we do hope that we will see you for programs, events between now and then. Meanwhile, have a wonderful summer, a safe summer, and look forward to seeing you all again very, very soon. And have a good night. Thank you for joining us.
Night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, Howard. Good night, Michael. It's good to see you. Good night, Amber.
Good
Night, Howard.
night.
Good night. Good night to everybody here in the classroom. You are very